Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English Speakology 2.0. In today's lesson, Ryan and I are going to talk about one very important word in English, would. This small word is extremely powerful, and it is used in many daily conversations.
That's right, Alex. Many English learners feel confused about the word would because it has several meanings and functions. However, once you understand the main uses, you will notice that native speakers use would all the time in natural conversation.
We will focus on polite requests, offers, invitations, preferences, and imaginary situations. These are the most common ways would appears in daily life.
Let's start with polite requests. One of the most common uses of would is to make requests sound softer and more respectful.
For example, instead of saying, "Can you help me?" you can say, "Would you help me?" The second sentence sounds more polite and slightly more formal.
You might say, "Would you please close the window?" This sounds gentler than "close the window." Adding would shows respect.
In a workplace situation, you could say, "Would you mind sending me that file?" This is a very common phrase in professional communication.
Notice that "would you mind" is followed by a verb with ing. For example, "Would you mind waiting for a few minutes?" This structure is extremely useful in daily conversations.
Another common use of would is to make offers. When you want to offer something politely, you often use would.
For example, "Would you like some coffee?" This is a very natural way to offer a drink.
You can also say, "Would you like me to help you?" This shows willingness to assist someone.
In restaurants, servers often say, "Would you like to see the menu?" or "Would you like anything else?" These are standard polite offers.
When someone offers you something, you can respond, "Yes, I would love that." Or you can say, "No, thank you, I'm fine." Both responses are polite and natural.
Would is also used for invitations. For example, "Would you like to join us for dinner?" That sounds friendly and welcoming.
You could also say, "Would you like to come to my party this weekend?" This is a softer way to invite someone.
If you want to accept the invitation, you can say, "Yes, I would be happy to." That sounds enthusiastic and polite.
If you need to decline, you can say, "I would love to, but I already have plans." This sounds much better than simply saying no.
Now let's talk about preferences. We often use would with rather to express what we prefer.
For example, "I would rather stay home tonight." This means you prefer staying home.
You can also say, "I would rather watch a movie than go out." This compares two options and shows your preference clearly.
In daily life, you might hear someone say, "I would rather not talk about it." This is a polite way to avoid a topic.
Another structure is would prefer. For example, "I would prefer tea instead of coffee." This is slightly more formal than would rather.
One very important use of would is in imaginary or hypothetical situations. For example, if I had more time, I would travel more. This talks about an unreal situation.
Notice that we use would in the main clause. The sentence structure is often if plus past tense plus would plus base verb.
For example, if I won the lottery, I would buy a big house. This is imaginary because you did not win the lottery.
Another example is, "If I were you, I would take that job." This is a common way to give advice.
In daily conversation, people often say, "I would do that if I were you." This means they think it is a good idea.
Another interesting use of would is for the future in the past. This happens when we talk about something that was in the future at a past time.
For example, she said she would call me. At that time, the call was in the future, but now we are talking about it in the past.
Another example is, "I knew it would be difficult." This shows a prediction in the past.
This structure is very common in storytelling. For example, he promised he would help. The promise happened in the past.
We also use would for repeated actions in the past. This is similar to used to.
For example, when I was a child, I would visit my grandparents every summer. This shows a regular past action.
Another example is, "He would always tell funny stories." This describes a habit in the past.
However, remember that would for repeated actions is usually used in storytelling. It often sounds more natural in longer narratives.
Let's look at some short daily conversation examples using would.
Imagine you're at a cafe. You say, "Would you like to sit by the window?" That sounds friendly and polite.
Your friend might respond, "Yes, I would. It's brighter over there." That answer sounds natural.
At work, you might say, "Would it be possible to finish this tomorrow?" This sounds much softer than demanding something.
At home, you could say, "Would you mind helping me with the dishes?" That sounds respectful.
One common mistake is using would in the if clause incorrectly. For example, "if I would have time" is incorrect in standard English.
The correct sentence is, "If I had time, I would help you." Only the main clause uses would.
Another mistake is forgetting the base form of the verb after would. For example, "I would to go" is incorrect.
The correct form is, "I would go." Always use the base form after would.
Let's begin with one very common use of would, which is talking about past habits. We often use would to describe things that happened regularly in the past, especially when we are telling stories or remembering childhood.
That's a great point. For example, I could say, "When I was a child, I would visit my grandparents every summer." And that sentence shows a repeated action in the past.
Exactly. Another example would be, "My father would read me a story before bed every night." That sentence describes a routine that happened again and again.
It's important to notice that we usually use would for repeated actions, not for single events. If something happened only one time, we normally use the simple past tense instead.
That's true. For instance, I wouldn't say "I would break my leg last year" because that was a single event. Instead, I would say "I broke my leg last year."
However, if I'm telling a story and describing background habits, would sounds very natural. I could say, "Every weekend we would go to the beach, and my sister would collect shells."
That sounds like a story, and it feels warm and nostalgic. Using would in this way makes the memory feel more vivid and personal.
Now let's talk about expressing preferences. We often use would to talk about what we prefer, especially in polite or hypothetical situations.
Yes, and one very common structure is would rather. For example, I can say, "I would rather stay home tonight than go to a crowded party."
That sentence clearly shows your preference. I could also say, "I would rather work in the morning because I feel more productive at that time."
Another useful structure is would prefer. For instance, "I would prefer a quiet place to study," which sounds polite and clear.
These expressions are especially helpful in conversations at restaurants, at work, or when making plans with friends. They allow you to share your opinion without sounding too strong or direct.
For example, if someone asks, "Do you want tea or coffee?" you could say, "I would prefer coffee, please," and that sounds polite and respectful.
You can also use would to ask about someone else's preference. For example, "What would you rather do this weekend?" is a very natural question.
That question opens the door for discussion. The other person might answer, "I would rather relax at home because I've had a busy week."
Another common use of would is in invitations and suggestions. We often say, "Would you like to?" when inviting someone to do something.
Yes, and that form sounds much more polite than simply saying, "Do you want to?" For example, "Would you like to join us for dinner tonight?" sounds friendly and respectful.
You can also use would when making gentle suggestions. For example, "I would suggest leaving early to avoid traffic," which sounds softer than giving a direct command.
That's very useful in professional situations. Instead of saying, "Leave early," you can say, "I would recommend leaving early," and it sounds more professional.
We also use would when offering help. For example, "I would be happy to help you with that project," which shows willingness and kindness.
That sentence makes the speaker sound supportive and cooperative. It's a great way to build positive relationships.
Now let's talk about using would to imagine the future. This is common in conditional sentences, especially the second conditional.
Yes, and a typical structure is if plus past simple plus would plus base verb. For example, "If I had more time, I would learn another language."
That sentence describes a situation that is not true right now. You don't have more time, but you are imagining what you would do.
Exactly. Another example is, "If I won the lottery, I would travel around the world." That's a dream, not a current reality.
These sentences are great for conversations about goals and dreams. You can ask someone, "What would you do if you could live anywhere in the world?"
That question can lead to an interesting discussion. Someone might answer, I would move to a small town near the ocean because I love the sea.
Notice how would helps us explore possibilities. It makes the conversation more creative and thoughtful.
Another important use of would is when giving opinions politely. Instead of saying something very directly, we soften it with would.
For example, instead of saying that plan is bad, you could say, I would say that plan might need some changes.
That sounds much more diplomatic. It shows that you are expressing your opinion without being too harsh.
In meetings, people often say, I would argue that this strategy is more effective, which sounds professional and balanced.
You can also say, I would think that we should consider other options, and that invites discussion instead of creating conflict.
Using would in this way helps maintain harmony in conversations. It makes your communication smoother and more respectful.
Let's also talk about reported speech. When we report what someone said, we often change will to would.
That's correct. For example, if someone says, I will call you later, in reported speech, we say, he said he would call me later.
The word would shows that we're talking about a future action from a past perspective. It shifts the tense back.
Another example could be, she said she would finish the work by Friday. That sentence reports her promise.
This use is very common in storytelling and everyday conversation. It helps us clearly explain what someone promised or planned to do.
There is also a special use of would to describe refusal in the past. For example, he wouldn't listen to me.
That sentence doesn't mean he was unable to listen. It means he refused to listen.
Exactly. Another example is, the car wouldn't start this morning, which suggests repeated failure or refusal.
It almost sounds like the car had a personality. Using wouldn't in this way adds emotion to the sentence.
We can also say, she wouldn't apologize, even though she knew she was wrong. That shows strong unwillingness.
Let's imagine a real-life conversation to see how would fits naturally. Suppose we're planning a weekend trip.
That sounds good. I might say, where would you like to go this weekend? Which invites your opinion politely.
I could answer, I would love to go to the mountains because I need some fresh air. That expresses desire and preference.
Then I might say, if we left early on Saturday, we would avoid the heavy traffic. That's a conditional sentence.
And I could respond, I would rather leave on Friday night so we have more time there. That shows my preference clearly.
During the trip, I might say, when I was younger, my family would camp in this area every summer. That uses would for past habits.
And if something goes wrong, you might say, the door wouldn't open, so we had to find another way in. That shows refusal or failure in the past.
We can also use would when talking about regrets in imaginary past situations. This is often part of the third conditional.
Yes, for example, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam. That sentence talks about a past situation that cannot be changed.
Another example is, if we had left earlier, we would have caught the train. It expresses regret.
These sentences are very common in reflective conversations. People use them when thinking about what they could have done differently.
Even in casual talk, you might hear someone say, I would have helped you if I had known, which shows good intention but missed opportunity.
In daily life, using would often just makes you sound more polite. For example, would you mind closing the window sounds gentler than close the window.
That's true. Similarly, I would appreciate your feedback sounds more professional than give me your feedback.
At work, someone might say, we would like to inform you about a change, which sounds formal and respectful.
In customer service, it's common to hear, how would you like to pay, which gives the customer options politely.
As we can see, would is an extremely flexible word. It can express politeness, imagination, preference, past habits, reported speech, regret, and much more.
The key is to practice using it in real conversations. The more you use would naturally, the more comfortable and fluent you will become.
Try to notice how native speakers use would in movies, interviews, and daily conversations. Pay attention to the tone and context.
With practice, you would feel more confident speaking English in different situations. That confidence will help you communicate clearly and politely.
Thank you for joining us again on English Speakology 2.0. We hope this lesson helps you understand and use would more effectively in your daily conversations.
Keep practicing, stay curious, and continue improving your English every day. We would love to see you in our next lesson.